In this video, we'll be reviewing how to increase the penile girth using science. We'll go over some of the scientific studies, some of the devices such as the vacuum erection device and clamping, some techniques such as Jelqing. We'll even touch on some of the more advanced concepts such as DHT gel, Xiaflex, and PRP. Best of all, we'll go over my own personal theory, my routine, and my results. It's going to be a very comprehensive video, so let's get started. Okay, so first let's start with one of the most basic things, and that's using a vacuum erection device. So a vacuum erection device is essentially composed of a cylinder. This is one right here. This one cost me about 40 bucks. It's a Lilov brand. And it's pretty cheap. You can buy this on Amazon. And then you also have a pump. So we have a pump here. This was, I think, was around like 20 bucks or so. You attach the pump to the cylinder and then you create a vacuum. Now the cool thing about this pump is it has a pressure gauge here, so you know how much pressure you're creating inside the vacuum, and you put this into your pelvis. Now one thing I like to do is essentially put in like a sleeve like this. I put it here and I apply it to the cylinder here, and this helps create a nice seal in the vacuum cup, in the vacuum cylinder. So I also manscape to make sure you just create a nice little seal. A lot of people that complain that they can't get it to work is because they're usually not manscaping, or they don't know how to create a good seal using this little sleeve over here. There's many types of pump. So there's the most basic one. This is one of the most basic one. It's actually my favorite one. I like the basic ones. There's also other ones such as the Vacurect. So Vacurect, or that style of pumps, essentially help men who have really bad erectile dysfunction achieve erections for the purpose of sex. And the way that it works is essentially they place a cock ring here at the base. It doesn't have this little lid here. And then you inflate, you apply the pressure, you get an erection, and then you roll down the cock ring, and then it stays on your penis, and it holds basically the erection. And you can only do this about like 30 minutes at a time. And of course you got to wear the cock ring, which can kind of get in the way and might be uncomfortable. So it's another type of vacuum pumps, the Vacurect. Another one is the water pumps. So this is like the Bathmate, which is probably the most famous pump out there. And the way that it works is you essentially fill it up with water. You use it in the while you're taking a shower. You apply it, and you can even use like a special extra pump to achieve even higher vacuum inside of the vacuum pump. Now the problem with things like the Bathmate is that it doesn't have a pressure gauge. You don't necessarily know how much pressure you're applying. So if you're starting, you're basically going from 0 to 100 right off the bat. The Vacurect is a little bit better. It's better engineered just because it has a limit into how much pressure you can apply, and it's really not that much. But they're both have that same weakness in that they don't have a pressure gauge. So my own personal one is, again, just the most basic one. Now the big, well, let's talk about some of the benefits first. So the main benefit of using a vacuum pump is for the purpose of blood circulation. So in the case that you're not getting nighttime erections or daytime erections, or if you have some form of ED, the problem with not getting nighttime and daytime erections is that if you don't use it, you lose it. So your penis is basically going to begin to atrophy, and it's going to begin to shorten. Essentially, I believe it's about 2 centimeters a year if you're not getting any sort of erections. So men that have very, very bad erectile dysfunction, that are not getting erections, they experience shortening of the penis. So by using, they actually are recommended to use the vacuum erection device about 2 times a day, and this helps with the blood circulation. And this helps them make sure that their penis doesn't atrophy before they get a penile implant. Another benefit is for elongated healing. This is another thing that I use it for. So essentially I'll do like my PE exercises such as traction. I'll do it for a few hours, and then at the end of the night I'll pop a Cialis right before it, and then I'll use the vacuum erection device, and essentially I'll go to sleep with a nice inflated penis, which is going to be very basically healing in an elongated state. And now we'll look at some of the studies. So there's not a whole lot of studies that use the vacuum erection device on people that do not have Peyronie's or shortened penis or radical prostatectomy. So based on the few studies that I looked at, which again mostly was in the context of Peyronie disease, is that a vacuum erection device basically does not improve length. So there's basically no point in using a vacuum erection device if you're trying to achieve length increase. However, for the Peyronie's disease studies, we saw there was a significant reduction of Peyronie's disease curvature. So for people that have Peyronie's disease and want to just decrease the curvature, it achieves some pretty good results. Now, another thing is in the case of the radical prostatectomy patients, essentially they they experience a lack of decrease of girth after prostatectomy. So when they do a radical prostatectomy, it's almost expected that the patient is going to have erectile dysfunction, mainly because even with the robotic radical prostatectomy, they're still touching some of the nerves, and especially if they go through the urethra, they're basically creating a lot of trauma through the urethra, through the canal, and that can cause shortening of the penis. So it's both the trauma and the fact that they're messing with the nerves, which will mess with your erections. Now, nerves do tend to heal over time from about 6 months to a year, but in that time period, you're gonna basically experience a decrease in penile girth. So in the study, people that had radical prostatectomy and used the vacuum erection device basically did not lose any girth. They also did not lose any length. So that was really interesting. And then in the context of people that had a penile implant, basically a lot of the patients were told to use the vacuum erection device 1 to 2 times a day, about 30 minutes a day, 30 minutes each session. And they compare the people that used the vacuum erection device versus the ones that didn't, and the people that used the vacuum erection device actually received a longer and bigger implant. And the reason for this is that by using the vacuum erection device, they're basically pulling in blood into the corporal cavernosum, which is where the implant cylinders go in. And basically the surgeon is able to insert the larger cylinders instead of like the narrower cylinders. They're able to insert the longer, like the girthier cylinders, and they basically achieve a girthier penis through that result. And even it helped in length. So it was proven that that patients that received a penile implant that used the vacuum erection device actually received penile implants that were both longer and girthier. But interestingly enough, there's really no studies that prove that the vacuum erection device can actually create permanent increases in penile girth, especially outside the context of Peyronie's disease or prostatectomy or penile implants. So, it's sort of my own personal opinion that really vacuum erection device really does not cause any permanent increases in girth. But that's not to say it's not helpful, right? And why doesn't it? I think because at the safest sort of vacuum pressures that's recommended for beginners, which is about 5 to 7 Hgs, you're just not creating that internal outward expansion. You're not creating those pressures that are necessary to basically expand the tunica. Now, personally, I use my pump almost every day, but I go up to like 10 Hg, but I had to titrate towards that. Like it took a lot of work to get to 10 Hg. And I do see some results, but very minimal results. And so I did just a pure vacuum erection device for a long time, and I just didn't see any significant results. And I had a Peyronie's, so it really didn't even do anything in that case. However, the only real study that we have is the Bathmate survey. So let's take a look at that real quick. Oh, okay. So here we see this survey that was basically sent in 2020 to over 12,000 Bathmate customers. They asked the users about what Bathmate did for them. About 70.6% reported that the erections were both better and longer, while 79.4% said they had more confidence. In fact, 2 months, astonishing 92.9% users reported noticeably better erections, while 80% ended up either better, longer, or both. This is talking about erections, not length or girth. And so even in the study, they're not even claiming, even in their own study here, their own survey, they're not claiming that there was any sort of significant or permanent increases in girth or even length. So again, I just don't think that that vacuum erection devices are really that effective. Now, there are some benefits besides what I just mentioned, which is the blood circulation and so on, and that is using them for sex. So what I like to do is I usually, before I have a date or I hook up, or like, when I have a girlfriend, my girlfriend comes over, I use the vacuum erection device for about 30 minutes, and I'll kind of gradually go up to 10 HE, and I'll have a video on this separately. But that basically makes your penis nice and plump. Now you don't want to overdo it where it's like spongy, right? Because then it's really noticeable, and you're actually gonna have a hard time getting an erection. But if you do it just right, it's gonna be nice and firm, it's gonna be nice and girthy, and it's great to basically impress the girls and make them think that you have a big ass dick, when in reality you just you just pumped for about 30 minutes or so. The results of the pump last about 6 to 12 hours, and it gradually goes down. Depending on how much you pump, it may last longer than that. Some of the drawbacks, so you can get like blistering, you can get edema, so basically like the skin of your penis is gonna get inflated, and it's not dangerous. You can it'll go away. If you want to kind of like hurry it up and make sure that it goes away, you can like apply sort of like a sleeve on it, put it on the penis, so that basically sort of compresses it and makes the edema go away even faster. This has happened to me because sometimes like I'll overdo it, and then I have a date. It's like, oh shit, I overdid it, and it's kind of like weird looking. So I gotta like apply the sleeve and make sure that it actually kind of goes back to normal before the date. And another big drawback are the injuries, especially for the ones that don't have a gauge. So you see a lot of injuries, especially for bathmate. I just think it's like it just goes way too high, way too fast. And so yeah, these are my thoughts on the vacuum erection devices. Okay, so next I want to talk about another device, and that's using a penis clamp or something else known as clamping. And the way that this works is essentially you take this little clamp, they're super cheap, and you achieve an erection, like a hardest erection that you can get, and you then apply this to the base of the dick. You can use like a penis sleeve, like a short penis sleeve here, and apply it such that it's not really as uncomfortable, and it creates like very, very strong internal pressures, so that the tunica basically expands, because imagine you have a balloon, you inflate it, and then you hold the base, and so it's sort of pushing even that extra blood to the top, and you're creating that real pressure inside of the balloon, inside of the tunica. So clamping can be somewhat dangerous, but it's no more dangerous than like putting in like a cock ring. The only difference here is that you're applying a little bit more pressure than your typical cock ring. I mean, it's no more different than you holding the base of your dick and like holding an erection, right? And you're creating those internal pressures. And you're not supposed to do it for more than like 30 minutes, or if you see any sort of discoloration in the penis, like you're basically you need to stop and take a break, and then you can do it again after a few minutes. Is it effective? Of course, there's no sort of scientific studies to this, unfortunately. But in my own personal experience, and in what I've seen around the forums and from a lot of testimonials from guys, is that yes, it does work. And why does it work better than a vacuum erection device? Basically, a vacuum erection device mainly applies the pressure to the penile skin, and so it's only really that's really absorbing a lot of the pressure. And more so, it's actually pulling in a lot of water into that, so the girth gains that you see are not permanent, because it's mostly this edema, which goes away. But with a clamp, it's really creating really strong internal pressures, and that's pushing outward on the tunica, right? Which the vacuum erection device just doesn't create that internal outward pressure. And so clamping can be pretty effective. It's dangerous. So I used to do it. I don't really do it a lot because I prefer other techniques to increase penile girth. But basically, I think that clamping is a pretty good way of basically increasing the penile girth. I would say it's effective, but unfortunately, there's just really no scientific studies backing it. But yeah, that's my opinion on clamping. Okay, so next I want to talk about jelqing. So jelqing is basically a technique that you can do just using your hands. And the way that it works is you're basically supposed to achieve about an 80% erection. You don't want to achieve more than that because it can be very dangerous. I mean, I think jelqing in general is very dangerous. But anyways, the way that it works is you achieve an 80% erection. You can put on some lube, and you start by like grabbing the base of the penis and then applying pressure and going up to the glands of the penis, and then you can hold it there, and then even kind of like grab the glands of the penis and then stretch it a little bit. And think of it like a balloon, right? Again, going to the balloon analogy, is you have a balloon, you put some lube on it, and you basically kind of, hold the base, and then you squeeze it out, and you're gonna see that that part of the balloon is going to be sort of more expanded. And what you're basically, essentially, the theory behind this, and again, there's some studies for Jelqing, is that you're creating micro trauma in the tunica as you do this, like little micro tears in the tunica, but you're also creating a lot of those forces, external forces. So the problem with it is that I think it's extremely dangerous because you just don't know how much pressure you're applying. Imagine you're doing that to a balloon. At any point, that balloon can pop. You can basically damage your tunica if you're not careful. And we see tons and tons of cases of people doing this essentially and developing Peyronie's and all kinds of different issues. So it's something that you have to be very, I would never ever recommend Jelqing, especially if you're a beginner. Like a lot of people say, like, oh, it's the first thing you should do. Like, no, absolutely not. Like, it's dangerous. Like, you need to have a lot of patience and self-awareness to do it correctly. So, but does it work? Well, again, there's no studies for me to say conclusively, but from what I've seen from other people, I do very limited Jelqing, so I cannot give my own self-testimonial on this. But from what I see from other people is that yes, it does work. But you probably don't want to do it by itself because if you want to, you're creating those micro tears. If you sort of keep developing scar tissue in your penis, it's actually going to contract and become smaller because what you're creating is you're not creating healthy collagen, you're not creating healthy tissues, you're creating scar tissue, especially if those are like bigger injuries, bigger micro cracks in the tunica. So you probably want to couple it with something like either traction or an all-day stretcher or a vacuum pump, such that you are healing in an elongated state, right? You don't want that scarring to heal in a contracted state because you basically it's going to turtle and then you're going to get a shorter penis. So you will couple it with something else. More interestingly, I think if you can actually make it such that your body doesn't produce scarring, but really produces something called elastin, that could be the best, because now you're creating all these microfractures, and then you can apply something to the penis to basically inhibit collagen formation and force the body to put down elastin, and that can make your penis really stretchy and bigger. So in my personal opinion is that yes, it works, but it's too dangerous to be like one of the things that I would recommend for a newbie to do. It's something I think you should just kind of work your way up to it, and you should combine it with either a chemical substance which can break down collagen or inhibit collagen formation, which I'll talk about later in the video, and traction or all-day stretcher or a vacuum erection device, so that you're basically not making your penis shorter by causing so much micro trauma, and that micro trauma is basically turned into scar tissue. So those are my thoughts on Jelqing. Okay, so now we talked about basically all the different mechanical ways in which you can apply tension to the tunica to expand it in an outward direction, right, in a way that increases the girth. In my other video, I talked about how you can apply pressure to the tension to the tunica to expand it such that you get length increases. But when it comes to girth, it's actually somewhat limited, right? Like you can only do, like I mentioned, clamping, vacuum erection device, and Jelqing, and those are basically the very the very limited set of things that you can do. Oh, okay. So next I want to talk about PGE1 injections. So PGE1, it's essentially something that you can inject into the penis, and it's a vasodilator and a smooth muscle relaxer. And basically the way that it works is you inject it, you basically pull the penis, and then you inject it. And it gives you one of the strongest erections you ever feel in your life, and it's so strong that it basically hurts. So you get especially in my personal situation is I had Peyronie's, or have Peyronie's technically, and it was very, very painful because it created such a strong erection that I literally felt like the smooth muscle expands so much that it was pushing out on the scar tissue. So it was extremely painful by the sort of the dorsal top of the penis, which is where my scar tissue was. And so for the first few months that I did it, it was very, very painful, aside from the ache that you get from the PGE1 itself. Now the ache, like I essentially over time got used to it, so it's not really that bad anymore. But it's something that a lot of men experience if you inject it. And essentially, like, you get such strong erections is that it's really that smooth muscle expands so much that it's applying internal pressure, outward pressure to the tunica. Additionally, we see that PGE1 is also known to inhibit collagen formation. So it has been shown that PGE1 is essentially a collagen inhibitor. What this means is that if your body has any sort of new scarring or is producing new scarring, the PGE is going to inhibit that it's collagen, which is what you don't really want, especially type 3 collagen, which is what a Peyronie's plaque is. Now, tunica is composed of mostly collagen type 1 and elastin. And essentially, yeah, by using PGE1 in combination with things like, let's say, Jelqing or traction or clamping or anything like that, in which you're inducing those micro tears, you're essentially inhibiting the formation of new scar tissue. Additionally, because the smooth muscle cells grow, you're essentially, now this is not in science, I couldn't find any sort of studies to back this up, but my own personal theory is that the smooth muscles are becoming stronger, right, through the expansion. And so now when they relax, they're actually relaxing into bigger smooth muscle cells when they're fully relaxed. And now they're pushing against tunica that's becoming weakened because of the weakened tunica. And there's different ways of you can weaken the tunica. PGE by itself is not going to weaken it. It's simply going to inhibit the formation of new collagen. But the outward pressure of the smooth muscles might overtake the pressures of the tunica, the tension of the tunica, and actually expand it. So in my case, I had gotten girth contraction from the Peyronie's plaque. And when I would inject PGE1, it was so painful because I could literally feel like the expansion. Additionally, I could feel sort of like it tearing a little bit, and also because I did a lot of traction, and I also did a lot of vacuum erection device and some limited clamping, I could feel the scar tissue basically breaking up, and it was being replaced with healthy tissue, which is eventually why my Peyronie's is essentially resolved. I have an extremely slight curve, which is a good curve. I actually don't want to get rid of it because it's like such a slight curve that goes up, and I can, basically you hit the good spot for the women. But I did see a significant increase in penile girth with my PGE1 injections. Now, there is no studies for PGE1 in penises and their increase in girth, but I've seen a lot of anecdotal evidence that from patients, because there's patients that use PGE1 injections for years, decades, right? And they're in the different forms, and they basically can attest that, in fact, their penises got girthier over the years from continuous injection of PGE1. Additionally, there's also a patent, which I'll link below, and the patent basically states that the patent is if injecting PGE1 for many days and months continuously, and that basically can increase the penile girth. I mean, I don't know what kind of patent that's like. I don't know if they can patent that, but yeah, it's pretty interesting how they basically theorized that continuous injection of PGE1. In fact, it was a combination with other things that you can apply to the penis to soften up the tunica. So it was a combination of this. And this actually brings me to my other subject, which was Ronielle. So Ronielle is actually one of the few people that I actually look up to in the PE community. He has a blog, which I'll go ahead and link that up below. But essentially, he theorized that you can soften up the tunica and then use PGE1 injections to increase the smooth muscle strength, and then couple it with traction, and that basically can increase the size of your penis. I'll get more into this chemicals in a little bit. But essentially, I think PGE1 is my tried and true system for how I gain a lot of my girth. Now, over time, with the combination of VED, a little bit of clamping, and a lot of PG injections, and some DMSO, I was able to gain about 0.75 inches of girth. And now this is in addition of my original girth. So, one of these days I'll reveal my actual stats, my starting stats, my final stats, as I documented it, which I did over the course of, of my treatment. But to me, if I were to testify on something, it would be on the usage of PGE1 injections. Now, it's not for the faint of heart. Like, imagine having to put something inside your dick, and it really takes balls, for lack of a better word, to do it. Something that made it easier for me was like I used to hook up like a shit ton. I've slowed down a little bit more, in the recent months, but essentially I would like almost fuck a girl like every day, every other day. And I got really, really good at game. And so I would just kind of like drink. I was drinking also a lot. And I would just drink and inject it. And I was basically, that's how I kind of was my excuse for using it so much. And the alcohol would make the pain more tolerable. And over the time, it's actually like I don't even really feel the pain anymore. So I don't really need to drink anymore. But over this time is where I really, really saw this increase in girth. And it wasn't even like over many months. It was about, I want to say about 6 or 8 months that I really experienced this. Yeah, so I think, if there's one treatment I would recommend, is PGE1, but it's definitely not for the faint of heart. Oh, okay. And next I want to talk about sort of a combinational treatment that you could do. Is so you could combine like injection with something else to soften up the tunica. So there's kind of a lot of theory behind it. So let's talk about that next. Okay, so next I want to talk about Xiaflex. So Xiaflex is essentially an enzyme that can be injected into the penis or really into any sort of scar tissue, and it'll dissolve that scar tissue. It's basically an enzyme that dissolves collagen. And so it's used for things like Dupuytren's contracture, which is basically when the hand is like kind of stuck like this. It's really difficult to expand it. And they inject this, the Xiaflex into the joints, and it basically dissolves the scar tissue, which is what that is. And it's the same mechanism for using it in the case of Peyronie's. And so the way that it works is essentially you inject it, and now the injection, the trauma from the injection, the puncture wounds from the injection actually help break up the plaque, the scar tissue. And then you inject it and you deliver this enzyme, which then eats up the collagen. Now you have to be very, very careful, because if not done correctly, or if you're overzealous with your penis afterwards, you can get a penile fracture, because it basically thins out the tunica, such that if you're too rough with it, you can actually fracture it and cause even more issues, and then they have to go in there and surgically repair it. Now, there's been some studies on this, and Xiaflex has been known to be very, very effective, but more so in combination with traction. So there's a study that was done with the Restorex device and Xiaflex, and essentially there was very, very significant results. And again, all studies will be linked below. There was very, very significant results in the reduction of curvature and in the improvement of length. So in the improvement of length when using Xiaflex with a traction device, in this case Restorex, was about 2 centimeters in penile length gained. So it was very, very significant, and this was over a very short period of time. So we see that this is very, very interesting, because Xiaflex, it's something that essentially can break up collagen and help you get more results, increase the result of your traction in a shorter period. So the downside with Xiaflex, besides the causing of penile fractures in certain cases, is that it's extremely effective. Of course, you need to go to the doctor to get it, and it's basically unattainable for, I think, most people. We cannot just buy this, and even if we were to get it from a doctor, it's extremely expensive and it's dangerous. Which is why it's really, really interesting. It's really, really effective, and the mechanism of action is really interesting. But are there other things that we can use to soften up the tunica to potentially break up scar tissue? And that's where we talk about DMSO. So let's get started on that. So DMSO is essentially a substance that can transport things under the skin. So a lot of the problems with such like any topical thing that you may want to apply is thinking like, hey, I can just apply like verapamil or calcium blocker or whatever on top of the penis, is that it just will not penetrate the skin. It's also a big problem with like skincare products, hyaluronic acid, whatever it is that it just doesn't penetrate. And which is why, like, if you combine like minoxidil with like microneedling, it's actually more effective because it's able to more easier penetrate the skin. But in any case, DMSO is something that you don't need to do microneedling. You can just apply it, and it'll actually transport any molecule that has a certain molecular weight, and it has to be water soluble. So it'll bind to it, and it'll transport it to underneath the skin. So this is great because the big problem with a lot of the oral therapies that you have for Peyronie's is that simply the penis is just not vascular enough, so that the tunica doesn't necessarily get a lot of blood into it. You have a lot of like small veins, and the pentoxifylline can get there, but it's just not able to enough of it to get there to affect the scarring. So first, like, I'm very familiar with DMSO because I use it all the time, and it's something that it's first of all, you can get your hands on it. So here is a DMSO bottle that I used. This I bought on Amazon. It just really wasn't very expensive at all, and it's essentially a DMSO 99.995 pure pharma grade. And you cannot just apply this to the penis because it'll burn your skin. You have to be very careful. You essentially have to dilute it. And I would dilute it with apple vinegar, and then I would create a basically a substance. And hey, if you want to basically know how I created the substance, make sure you comment, like, and subscribe. So first, I actually want to go over some of the oral medications for Peyronie's. So this will essentially give us a good idea as to some of the things that we can potentially mix with DMSO, such that they're delivered directly to the scar tissue. And I'm very surprised that the people haven't really invented that, like scientists haven't really invented this. But it's something that recently came up in the Peyronie's forums in the last couple of years. So it's somewhat a cutting edge, this bro science, but it's I think the science is very sound. But here we see Potaba at the top of the list. And essentially, Potaba decreases fibrosis and inhibits collagen formation, right? And also inhibits fibroblast secretion, which is essentially what the Peyronie's plaque is. So Potaba is actually very interesting. So Potaba is essentially just the brand name for Paba. And Paba is just essentially vitamin B10, and you can buy this. Like, I bought this here off of Amazon. It was very cheap, and it comes in this powder form. And essentially, you can mix it and create this mixture of DMSO, apple cider vinegar, and Paba. And this was like my bread and butter. And then on top of that, I would add other ingredients. So, for example, you can add things like vitamin E. If you have a prescription, you can also use pentoxifylline. So this is what I used to do. And so basically I would use a pill crusher here and crush about 3 pentoxifylline tablets. And again, if you want that video, please make sure you support me and subscribe and comment and like. And I'll make this basically recipe on how to make DMSO safely with all these different ingredients. And these ingredients basically directly attack the fibrosis. So pentoxifylline prevents fibroblast proliferation and collagen deposition. Now you actually want elastin, but it does inhibit collagen. There's a few sort of side effects, but they're very mild. I would take it orally before I would start mixing it with DMSO. So I actually would experiment, and I created my own formula for how to utilize these ingredients. And here's some of those. So here's one. Basically, this is vitamin C. I would also combine it with an emulsifier because otherwise it's too watery and too runny. If you combine it with an emulsifier, basically it sticks to the penis a little bit better. Notice with vitamin C, it's a little bit it's yellowy, and I would apply this some days. This one was just pure Paba and pentoxifylline together. This is actually was my bread and butter. And yeah, there's a lot of other things that I tried. So for example, I tried magnesium. And the whole point of it is to break down scar tissue, inhibit collagen formation, sort of promote elastin formation. And essentially, when I would put it on, like, it just basically made the penis very stretchy. And the only problem is very sort of time consuming both to make. You have to sort of know what you're doing, or otherwise you're gonna burn your fucking dick, which actually happened to me a couple of times because I just during this process. But hey, it is what it'll heal. It's just it's like a burn. It'll go away. But it's also very effective. So in combination with traction, right, potentially Jelqing, if you're at that level, you're creating these scars. You are then applying DMSO to basically sort of make the tunica more malleable, more elastic. You can really increase your gains, right, from PE. Now, most of this we're only really addressing the tunica and the skin. So next I want to talk about some of the things that we can actually do to affect the smooth muscle itself, and how can we actually increase smooth muscle. I already talked about it through PGE1, which actually, my theory helps increase the strength of the smooth muscle cells. But is there any way that we can actually increase the count of smooth muscle cells? And that's what we'll look at PRP shots next. Okay, which brings me to my next topic, which are PRP injections. So PRP, also known as platelet-rich plasma or the P shot, is something that essentially is taken from your own blood cells. It's put into a centrifuge and is circulated, rotated, and they basically extract this PRP. And then they inject it into your penis. Now, PRP is actually used in a lot of different things, particularly for the hair. And it's supposed to basically promote the growth and creation of stem cells. And as we know, essentially stem cells can basically be formed to create any type of cells. In this case, it would be smooth muscle cells. In the case of the hair, it's basically into the hair follicles. And so this is very interesting. And basically, there is some sort of scientific evidence for platelet-rich plasma. So number one, mainly around the erectile function. So some of the studies basically conclude that indeed PRP does improve erectile function. It doesn't talk anything about like length or girth gains, but essentially it's my theory is that when you're injecting the PRP, you're basically creating stem cells into the smooth muscle cells. And the smooth muscle, the stem cells basically then basically become smooth muscle cells. And this is backed by science because PRP is basically secretes these growth factors. And the growth factors basically stimulate the proliferation and of the different stem cells. And this is basically proven by science. And so as far as results when it comes to length and girth, so some of the clinics that I've been looking around, I'm actually very interested in trying PRP. I have just started looking into it recently. But I think it's something that you can basically use to enhance or increase the size of the smooth muscle, such that you're combining it with other things to basically stretch out both lengthwise and girthwise the tunica, and then you inject PRP, and now that basically empty space can be taken up by the new smooth muscle cells and create stronger, better erections. And so, yes, PRP I think looks super interesting. It's something that I would like to try personally. But anyways, the results that the clinics basically say it's a consensus of about around a 1/2 inch gain of length and a 1/2 inch gain of girth. Now, I have no idea whether this is permanent, whether each session essentially results in this potential gain. I would imagine that because it's basically inserted into the tunica, into the smooth muscle, it basically only promotes smooth muscle cell growth. So if you couple it with traction and other things, you can actually really, really maximize, your results of PE. So if you do something like traction or clamping or jelqing for the tunica, use something like DMSO to soften up the tunica to basically inhibit collagen formation, and do something like PRP to grow the smooth muscle cells within the penis, you can really, really maximize the results of PE. So those are my thoughts on PRP. Okay, next I want to talk about DHT. So DHT is basically a hormone that's derived from testosterone via a process known as 5-alpha reductase. And DHT is an extremely important hormone when it comes to penile health and penile growth, particularly when a boy is in the fetus, is in the womb, and then also during puberty. So when the boy is in the womb, basically the DHT from the mother is used to basically form the penis and basically dictate whether a boy is going to have a penis. If a mother does not have a lot of DHT, or if the boy is basically not able to produce that DHT, it will result in a micro penis. DHT also is extremely important during puberty, and this is because DHT actually indicates how big the penis is going to grow during puberty. And this is proven by a couple of studies. Primarily, there's one in which there was a few boys that basically had disorder in which their bodies could not transform testosterone to DHT. So their bodies had normal amounts of testosterone but had no DHT, and they essentially had micropenis. And funny enough, this is actually how the finasteride was found, which is basically a treatment for male pattern baldness, because it stops the creation of DHT. So these boys basically had very good hairlines that they did not have any sort of recession. They have actually pretty decent muscular muscular structure, because when you are not converting to DHT, you actually have a little bit more testosterone, which is also the true if you're taking finasteride, you're actually going to have a little bit more testosterone. But in either case, this study basically looked at these boys who had the DHT deficiency. They could not translate testosterone to DHT. And they were basically treated with the topical application of DHT gel to the penis. So there were three groups. There were like one group which was early puberty, one that was puberty, one that was post-puberty. And it was found that the boys that was basically in early and puberty and puberty, this have significant results, and basically they were able to do significant increases in the penile length of their penis. Now for boys that were post-puberty, it just really wasn't effective at all, unfortunately. And why is this? So Ronielle basically theorized, and based on some of the studies, this may be true, but I need to do a little bit more studying on this. But essentially, he theorized that during puberty, essentially your body is releasing all these DHT hormones into the body, and then the body basically becomes not so sensitive to the DHT. So different parts of the body have different sensitivity levels to the DHT. So for example, your hair may actually become more sensitive. The hair follicles may become more sensitive to DHT as you get a little bit older. But the ones in your penis basically just are not sensitive at all. They become basically oversaturated with DHT, and they stop basically being sensitive to it. So applying DHT to it basically does nothing once you're at post-puberty. However, Ronielle's theory, is that you can essentially resensitize the DHT receptors in the penis by using finasteride and by cycling between finasteride and DHT gel. So essentially, you would hypersensitize the DHT receptors in the penis by taking finasteride. That you would stop, and then you could take the DHT gel, and this would basically have the same effects as if you were going through puberty. And the goal of the DHT is essentially to grow smooth muscle cells, such as they become bigger. So there's actually science behind this. So let's look at the study. So there's this study basically that looked at the sustained delivery of DHT and its impact on the pathophysiology of smooth muscle cells. And basically, again, this study will be linked below. But essentially, we see that sustained delivery of DHT to cultures of smooth muscle cells significantly increased cellular growth. So essentially in this study, they delivered DHT to cells that were both endothelial cells and smooth muscle cells. So endothelial cells are basically the blood vessels, cells that carry blood. And smooth muscle cells are obviously smooth muscle cells such as the heart and inside the corpus cavernosum. So this is something that basically the penis is composed of, and it basically significantly increased cellular growth, while DHT exposure to individually to those types of cells basically had no effect. So and also, what's interesting here is the effect of the DHT on the vascular smooth muscles, which is EC plus SMC here, was found to be dose dependent. So you basically want to apply a good amount of DHT to basically have any sort of effect on the smooth muscle cells. So there are, of course, some downsides of applying DHT, even topically, because it will go systemic. And that is, it'll accelerate male pattern baldness, right? Even if you're using finasteride, because finasteride stops the conversion, it does not necessarily destroy DHT or anything like that. So you will be basically promoting the accelerating male pattern baldness. You also get things like pimples. stuff like that. Stuff that basically happens when you get into steroids. When you start taking steroids, now you will also have much better performance at the gym and be able to essentially you will be more aggressive as well. So these are some of the downsides, but I think the theory is sound. I would love to get my hands on some DHT gel and try this as well. But I think for me, I think PGE1 is sort of good enough to sort of promote the growth of smooth muscle cells. But again, the data is better for DHT because there's actually been studies and it's shown that DHT does do this. Now, its effect on the penis post-puberty is really not known, and whether it's due to the sensitivity of the receptors is not truly well known. But it's an interesting theory nonetheless, and it's something that I would personally love to try myself. I may have to make a trip down to TJ and get some DHT gel and try this on myself. So, in any case, those are my thoughts on DHT. Okay, so next I want to talk about fillers. So there's two main types of fillers that are used. One is hyaluronic acid, the other one's polyaptic acid, which have been well studied and are actually relatively safe. There was one complication that I came across in which a patient actually died from it, which is concerning, but it seems to be really not the norm. It's only one out of all the cases. Otherwise, as long as performed by someone that's a doctor, a reputable doctor, it seems to be pretty safe. So what are the results of these types of fillers? Well, let's look at one of the studies that was taken. So in this study, basically they looked at both hyaluronic acid and polyaptic acid here. That's HA for hyaluronic acid and PLA for polyaptic acid here. And basically, it's generally safe. I wanted to look at the results. So the mean penile girth increased to a maximum at 1 month. So the problem with these two types of fillers is that just like a vacuum erection device, the results are not permanent, and also it can feel a little spongy. But some of these, I think, I forget exactly which one, they actually feel a little bit firmer. You can also get lumpiness with these. So it's actually kind of interesting. But essentially, the mean increase was around 2.5 centimeters in the penile girth gain in the HA group, and 2.3 centimeters in the PLA group, which is very, very significant. And then the HA group gradually decreased for up to 18 months. So it continued to decrease. So around 18 months, you have to basically get it redone. And basically the same for the PLA group. What's interesting though is that it didn't fully go back to its normal state. So the mean penile girth were actually significantly increased at 18 months compared to the baseline, to how they started. So essentially it was an increase of 1.41 centimeters and a main increase of 1.79 centimeters respectively in the HA and PLA group. So this is very interesting. So I think fillers are actually extremely interesting, and I would love to get it, but they're also very, very expensive. I'm not a big fan. I heard that some of the guys complain that it's kind of smushy and that it gets lumpy. What's really, really interesting though is that in patients that have a penile implant, there's actually a technique that you can use when the patient has a penile implant. You inject it, right? And they get amazing results. I've actually seen pictures of it. It looks really, really, really good. And the reason for this is because when it is injected to a normal penis that doesn't have penile implant, it basically the penis, retracts, and this is where the lumpiness comes from. It doesn't really stay in the body. Whereas with an implant, you basically can be erect for many, many hours, and you can stay like that. And the filler forms in a very uniform, very well-formed state that's feels natural, and can even carry body heat, which is really, really interesting because a lot of the implant patients complain that the penis can get cold. So it can basically carry the body heat, which is very interesting. So personally, if I were to get a penile implant, I would absolutely get some sort of filler, either HA, probably most likely HA, and get absolutely astonishing results. So with the implant and HA is you can get really, really good results. But the downside is that it's really, really expensive. It does go away, but it does leave some form of permanent results to it. So you do have to keep going in. And the problem also is that there's some fillers that are really, really dangerous. There's also another type of filler like fat. There wasn't a study right away that I could find with fat. So let's look at this study for using fat as a filler. So this basically, the study looked at 52 patients. who had complained of a small penile girth. They underwent the fat injections for penile girth enhancement. So basically, so I'll basically just summarize it here. So the difference between here the both groups, in both groups essentially the difference was just how much of the fat they injected before and after was not significant. So the difference between both groups was not actually significant. So preoperatively, G1 was 7 centimeters, G2 was 7.06 centimeter. After the operation was 9.29 centimeters, and G2 was 9.34. So we see about a bit of a over 2 centimeter gain here, which is pretty good. Now I don't know how safe fat injections are. It seems like it's very safe according to the study, but I don't know about how permanent it is. I didn't see anything in the studies, unfortunately. But I think in any case, any of these types of fillers are generally safe, will increase the girth, and I think you gotta sort of do a little bit of research on which one feels better. I'll do a little bit more research and find out. I think from what I've heard is hyaluronic acid is definitely the one that gives you the best type of results. But anyway, so one of the most dangerous things is like when people go to like TJ and get some really crazy things injected, right? Like silicone or all kinds. Like I've seen some horrible things that have been injected. Then the penis basically gets infected and may become necrotic, and you get an infection, may have to get cut off, or at the very least the tissue has to be the filler has to be surgically removed. The beauty of like hyaluronic acid and polyaptic acid is you can inject something to basically dissolve it. And basically with fat and with these other acids is that the body reabsorbs it, so they're generally safe. But yeah, the problem is going somewhere where they're not reputable. But hey, if you can afford it and you're down to do this, I would couple this with like other forms of PE. And it's kind of like a vacuum erection device. This is really how I'll basically compare it to, because it's really making an effect sort of on the skin of the penis, not really on the smooth muscle cell or even on the tunica. So I personally like, hey man, I'm not about to spend a bunch of money on this. Like if it's gonna be permanent, I might as well just kind of use the vacuum erection device before a day. Its results last for about 12 to 24 hours maximum, but hey, it's a lot cheaper. So anyways, that's sort of my thoughts on fillers. Okay, so next I want to talk about surgery. So there are essentially two types of surgeries that you can get to increase the penile girth. Number one is grafting. So essentially the way that grafting works is they basically cut this penile skin by the glands. They deglove the penis. They basically pull the skin back, and then they attach a graft to it. And there's different kinds of graft that you can get, and this is mainly for people that have peyronie's, but you essentially could get it if you look hard enough, right? For just penile girth enhancement. It's generally safe, but I think a lot of it, the gains is dictated mostly by the amount of grafting that they do. And the type of graft that they put on. Also, it depends on the type of graft, how it will feel. So it'll be on top. So it's not enhancing, it may feel smushy. It's not enhancing like the smooth muscle. It's not creating a rigid thing. It may feel a little bit smooth. And you're also going to lose a lot of sensation, right? Because you're not feeling that, like when you're having sex, you're not feeling that anymore. Personally for me, I would never ever get my penis degloved. Like it just looks fucking horrible in the literature, in the videos, and in the pictures. But it's generally safe, and it's done all the time for peyronie's. The second type of surgery is called a penile implant. So the penile implant is essentially the same thing as they deglove the penis, and they attach this basically, it's kind of like made out of like a plastic-like sleeve that they put on it. So they basically inject it, it goes on top of the penis, and then they attach it to the glands of the penis through sutures to basically they stitch it. And you can get insane girth gains, right? It's actually, the device itself is FDA approved. Not to say the surgery is FDA approved, but rather the device itself is FDA approved, which it's actually not that hard to get a device FDA approved. Just gotta go through some trials to make sure that the device is safe, it's sterile, it can live within the if you put it in contact with the body, it'll be safe. And they have different sizes from like normal to large to extra large, and I think most people will want the extra large. But again, the same problems that you get with grafting. Number one is that this just feels unnatural, and this problem with this one is not that it's soft, but it's like it's hard, right? And a lot of the guys that get this is because they have a small penis, and so this only addresses the girth but does absolutely nothing for the length, right? So you end up with like this fat looking penis that's like super short. Let's say if you want to have a good length, you could get it, but it's still, to me, it looks disgusting. It looks gross to me. Like it's way too much, especially the XL. And then you're also losing a lot of sensation, right? Like because now when you're having sex, you don't feel that sensation anymore. And so it does help your flaccid girth. But yeah, personally, I would never ever. I would highly discourage people from getting the penile implant. I think there's been some horror stories. And the problem with both types of surgeries is that you can basically induce basically peyronie's, because you're basically causing a lot of trauma there. You're creating a lot of scar tissue, and you can actually get a shortened penis because there's of the trauma, and the scar formation is going to contract, right, ever so slightly. It will contract depending on the size of the device that they put on, and you essentially can get a shortened penis as a result. Now, especially if they take it out and now you don't have this device no longer keeping it a stretch, and you do no sort of traction or anything like that, your penis will get short for sure. So this is a huge problem, even though they say like, oh yeah, you can just take it out and it'll go back. No, that's not true. Like you're gonna get scarring, right, and it's gonna contract your penis. It's a huge problem. So yeah, I would just personally would never ever try any of the surgery. I would much rather just do some basic clamping, do some basic DMSO, even apply topical DHT gel before I like try this crazy ass like get my dick cut up. It's insane. So those are my thoughts on surgery. Oh, okay, so here I want to talk about my own personal theory and what I've done so far, and sort of what I want to do to take it to the next level overall. So my theory is basically this. I think the first thing you need to focus on are the manual forces on the tunica, right? So this in the case of lengthening, you want to do a lot of traction, doing it on the tunica. This essentially, you can create micro tears. Whatever exercise you're doing, whether it's clamping, jelqing, traction, whatever it is, you're creating these micro tears. You have to be super careful though, not to creating the big tears. And then you want to make sure that you're inhibiting collagen formation. So you want to make sure that you're creating as much as you can healthy tissue, like elastic tissue. And this is done through things like using like DMSO with the different sort of like substances that you can combine DMSO with to make sure that you're inhibiting collagen formation. You can also do this with PGE. This is for inside of the tunica. So with PGE, for a fact, you're inhibiting collagen formation as well. This is my bread and butter really nowadays is PGE, but you could also substitute it with DMSO, or actually combine it for the absolute best results. So once you force the tunica to change to be more malleable, and again with the DMSO, you can actually soften up the collagen. It depends on the ingredients, and again, make sure you like and subscribe so that I can make that DMSO video. But yeah, so you'll be making it more malleable, and be able to actually expand both girth-wise and length-wise. Next, you want to make sure you're growing your smooth muscles, and there's two ways that you can do this. One is with PRP shots, and you can get those, and again in combination with the traction to get absolutely optimal results. You could potentially also do it with androgens, with DHT, and potentially resensitizing those by cycling with finasteride with a DHT inhibitor. Now the science on that is a little bit less clear than the PRP. So probably the PRP is the preferred way, but I think probably in the long run androgens might be a little bit cheaper. And hey, if you're into bodybuilder, you might actually get some benefits from that. I'm kind of deciding which one I want to try. I think for now I'm very happy with my own theory that PGE one actually increases the size of the smooth muscles, and yeah, I want to make sure, I want to find some more studies to actually back this up. So I'll make a separate video on that. So yeah, so basically first you want to force out the tunica, then you want to grow the smooth muscle, and again, and think of it like a bicycle tire in which you have the outer layer, and that's the tunica. The inner layer is the smooth muscle. So you want to make sure that you're growing both, and then you want to basically focus on the air inside the bicycle tire or the blood inside the penis. So you want to make sure you have good vasodilation. So things like Cialis helps. Have making sure you're not smoking, you're exercising, and basically prevent a lot of things that are going to constrict blood to the penis. And so you want to basically have a nice, healthy lifestyle. And with all of these things, like you want to make sure you're focusing on this outward expansion. So for me, that's PGE1. So you're extending the tunica, you're growing the smooth muscle, and you're increasing the blood supply to the penis as much as you can. And this will give you very, very solid erections, very strong, naturally feeling erections that are actually expanding more and more as you do the PE exercises. Lastly, if you can afford it, I think fillers can be safe and effective, particularly hyaluronic and polyaptic acid. I think they're very safe and effective. And hey, if you have the money, you could try it, but I don't think it's any different than using a vacuum erection device. Although the results may be permanent, but I think in the overall, in the feeling, I don't think it's going to be as optimal as like you growing just the tunica and the smooth muscle. Like that's going to feel like a real hard, real natural erection, just bigger. But hey, I think fillers have their place, and I think they can feel pretty good. I think if you have a penile implant, I think it's absolutely a great thing that you can do is get a filler with the penile implant. So it's just something. This is my own theory, my own things that I want to implement little by little. But next, I want to talk about my own routine. So these days I'm using my vacuum erection device, and that's basically a lot of my bread and butter. So I do that for scar inhibition because I'm injecting all the time. I want to make sure to expand any sort of scarring, even though it's in the tissue in the skin. Like that's perfect. That's a vacuum erection device. As we saw in the case of Peyronie's, it's actually pretty helpful to inhibit like scarring and to basically not form any curvature. So it's perfect. I also use it for long healing. So as I couple it with traction to both inhibit scar formation and to grow, I then use my vacuum erection device so I can heal in an elongated state. I also do it for vascular health. So as I mentioned before, making sure you're getting those erections. So because I take finasteride, it may have an effect on my libido. I use this just to make safe, even though I get pretty good erections because I take Cialis every day. And that also actually helps my vascular health. But I use the BD for vascular health through the usage of pulse pumping. So when I pump, even before I date, I do it through this concept of pulse pumping. Basically, I don't just use that hand gauge that I showed you before. I use an automated pump, and a programmable automated pump, which I'll make a review, called the DP4000. And basically I program it so that it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. It basically just gets nice fresh nutrients. It basically mimics your nighttime erections that you get. And so the BD I use basically every day. Then I use the PGE1. Oh, and back to BD, I also use it for sex because it's amazing, right? I don't overdo it because otherwise it feels too smushy. But a nice little gain from a BD, like it looks perfect if you do it just right. Anyway, so after that, I use my PGE1 for sex. For collagen inhibition, make sure that, through my PE exercises, I'm not developing scar tissue. Scar reformation, in my case, because of the Peyronie's, it was actually, I had lost girth. And so because it had this exact same smooth muscle count as before and size, this basically forced them to really expand and force that scar tissue reformation. And this is why a lot of people that actually have Peyronie's and use injections report that they get extremely painful erections. And that's because it's basically expanding the scar tissue from within. Now, for me, I think it's pretty much done. Like my penis is already girthier than it was before my injury, so there's really no more scar reformation. But I'm also using it for internal expansion so that my smooth muscle cells basically continue to grow and get nice and strong. And based on like a lot of the reports from the different forums, is that the years that I use it over the years is just gonna get girthy and girthy, and it's absolutely true. My penis gets absolutely girthy, just even without a vacuum erection device. It gets absolutely girthy when I get a nice solid erection. So the PGE1 is absolutely critical for me. And then of course I do traction for scar inhibition and enlargement, but no, I talk more about that in my penile length video. So yeah, that's basically my routine. And there you go. That was a very comprehensive look as to how you can increase the penile girth using science. So we went over a lot of studies. I think my favorite part is the theory and how we could potentially just kick this up to the next level through chemical penile enhancement. And I would love to try a lot of these things that I talk about, like PRP and DHT gel. Next, I'll be focusing over DMSO. How do you make DMSO safely? How to use DMSO? What are some of the substances that you can combine it with for effective tunica softening and targeting of scar tissue? So, hey, if you like all this content, make sure you comment, like, and subscribe right now to help support me so that I can actually go out there and do all these things for you. So, again, for me, doing all these things is more of a like because of the girls, because I love girls. I love having sex with girls. I love impressing them with my dick, and I love piping them down. I love seeing their faces when they're like struggling to take that dick. And you know, I'm kind of like that, so I love it. It's kind of an ego thing, I'm not gonna lie. So anyways, make sure you comment, like, and subscribe. Make sure you check out this playlist to see all the videos that I have on penile enhancement and how you can use your penis to impress girls. I'll see you next time. Peace.